Good evening. My name is David Quick. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at DC Public Library. Welcome to MLK Library. How many of you, thank you. How many of you are here for the first time since we reopened? Cool. How many of you see somebody that you talk to on Grindr? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. We're really glad for this event tonight with JP Brammer for Hispanic Heritage Month. Yes, so good to see so many people here. We'll do a conversation between him and Jack, and then at the end we'll have book sales from Solid State. Thanks to Solid State Books for being here tonight. Gwen's selling books. She can also talk to you about some free copies that are available from our foundation. Thanks to the DCPL Foundation for supporting us tonight. A little bit about our two authors. I won't go long. I'm very happy to welcome JP Brammer to discuss his latest book, Hola Papi. JP is a writer, journalist, and illustrator who has written for The Guardian, NBC News, Teen Vogue, The Washington Post, and many more. He's also done work for The Trevor Project and Netflix. As you probably know, JP runs a popular LGBTQ advice column called Hola Papi also, which you'll get a window into when you read tonight's book. Our moderator tonight is Jack Harrison Quintana. I'm happy to have my friend Jack here tonight. Jack is a queer activist who currently serves as director of Grindr for Equality, which uses the Grindr app to spread information to LGBT communities around the world related to health and social justice. Jack is a Georgetown University grad and a beloved member of DC's LGBT community. Everybody, JP Brammer and Jack Harrison Quintana.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to see you, and it's so wonderful to, in a way, be home. I did live here for 2 years, rounding up. I went on a very nostalgic walk on the way here. I passed the Heritage Foundation. Vibes, horrible, horrendous. The aura emanating from that building, always very off-putting. I passed by the Hyatt where they host MAL. I don't know if anyone has been. Don't Google it. And I'm so excited to be joining you here today.
I'm so excited to join you. Are you going to read first?
I am going to read first, and I'm going to do it with one hand, too. Hold on.
That's skills.
I know. I'm so talented. So in case you haven't read the book, what you need to know about this chapter, and about all the chapters really, is that it's formatted after my advice column. So there's a question, and the question has a sign-off. And in this case, it is Panicked Hispanic. And so if you hear me say panicked, I am referring to a person that I'm writing to. And also what you need to know is this takes place in a tortilla factory that I worked in Oklahoma. I kind of suddenly realized that I was a fake Mexican and that I needed to learn how to speak Spanish and make Mexican food. And this made my abuela very upset with me because she had sacrificed quite a bit to make sure that her entire family, all her children, ended up marrying white people and didn't learn Spanish. And I was kind of mucking that up for her, and she was not very pleased. So when I was at that tortilla factory, I was sort of navigating my identity, trying to figure out who am I, what's going on here. And I made friends with one of my coworkers named Javier. And so these events that I'm reading right here happen after we hired a new person whose name was Jesse. And Jesse was not a great person, not very fun, not great to be around. And she cracked a joke at me about how I should end up working in construction. And for me, it was just like not a big deal. But for Javier, it was a huge deal, even though it wasn't even directed at him, which made me feel my most prominent feeling, which is guilt. So here is How to Be a Real Mexican, an excerpt from that. I retreated to the bathroom to avoid their bickering, not because I hated conflict, which I did, but because I felt guilt. I was guilty, panicked. What I was doing was wrong. Who was I to want anything from Javier? Javier was dealing with real problems. Javier was out there defending me of all people, while he was undocumented, while he was struggling to support his kids, while he was trying to learn English. He wasn't there as part of some validating cultural activity. He was there for his survival. The things I wanted for myself, the things I thought would make me real, a Mexican last name, Mexican customs and traditions and language, these were things that made Javier's life harder in ways I had never known. Jesse's flippantly telling me to work in construction was mean, but it had no power over me. It existed only on the plane of rhetoric, where the two of us were on an even playing field. It wouldn't hold me back, and so it bounced right off of me. But it stuck for Javier. It meant something to Javier. Weeks went by, smelling of old salsa and queso, as school continued to pick up. I had become the president of like 4 different clubs, mostly because I'd been the only one to raise my hand. I was the Spanish club president, the president of the National Honor Society, and the editor-in-chief of the yearbook. And yet, I hardly did anything because our school was mostly interested in not getting shut down by the government and avoiding hallway stabbings. I started bringing books and homework to the restaurant, and Javier would ask to take a look at them. "You should quit," he told me once, leafing through my math book. "You suck at this job." But before I would inevitably quit, I had my final Spanish exam. It took the form of a disgruntled customer whom Rodrigo and Javier giddily pushed me into dealing with. The customer was a short, slim woman in a halter top who wore her sunglasses indoors and had long acrylic nails. She marched her plastic tray up to the register and slammed it down. "No English, her," Rodrigo said, grinning ear to ear. "Go ahead." "Fine," I sighed. I walked up to the counter, ready to face the final boss battle of my video game. The woman looked at me, and although I couldn't see her eyes, I could tell she was ready to behead me. "Hola," I said. "Que es tu problema?" I wasn't exactly sure what she said back, but it sounded like she was methodically cursing out my ancestors one by one, plucking them individually from the branches of my family tree, generation by generation, before arriving at me. I did manage to pick up, however, that she'd wanted chicken tacos instead of beef. "Lo siento," I said again and again in my dumb gringo accent. "Voy a make tacos nuevos." I heard Rodrigo and Javier busting a gut in the kitchen. "Un minuto, por favor." I went back to the kitchen, punched Javier and Rodrigo, which only made them laugh harder, and made the chicken tacos. The woman, meanwhile, was still talking without me there, fighting the very memory of me. I sheepishly returned with her food. I meant to tell her that they were on the house, that they were free. What I actually said, according to Javier's subsequent translation, was freedom tacos. "Here," I'd said, "freedom tacos." The woman, perhaps so thrown off by this that she perceived it as a power move, accepted the new tacos and went back to her table. Rodrigo and Javier practically jumped on me, applauding me and laughing so hard I thought they might fall over. For a moment, I stopped taking myself so seriously. I had utterly failed. I was having a great time. At last, my final day in the tortilla factory came. I was asked to do the most unpleasant tasks in the restaurant as a farewell gift. I walked into the sticky room where the bladders of soda were kept for the pop machine, and I cleaned the floor. I cleaned the bathrooms and then the tables, but the worst task was carrying a vat of hot grease out to the dumpster. Javier helped me with this, yellow grease slapping up at the lip of the vat as we walked, threatening to spill over with each step. "Ten cuidado, Wampa," he told me. I watched the snake god tattooed on his arm. It wriggled as he strained, its body covered in feathers, ancient and fierce. It was my second favorite tattoo of his. The other was the enormous Our Lady of Guadalupe he had on his back. She'd made a less than miraculous appearance once in the kitchen, when Sal had accused Javier of being a dirty bastard. Javier had lifted up his shirt, turned around, and said, "Say it to her." I was thinking how funny it was that these two competing gods could find a common place on Javier's body, when my foot caught on a crack in the concrete. I stumbled a little, enough to spill hot grease on Javier's arm. "Shit," he shouted. We quickly set the vat down and retreated into the shade of the building, where we sat in the grass. Javier hissing into his arm, my heart racing a mile a minute as I said, over and over, the one stupid phrase I could rely on. "Lo siento, lo siento." I still say that to Abuela sometimes in my head, hoping it will reach her wherever she is, be it heaven or hell or somewhere else. It's probably hell. I feel I want to apologize to her, like I apologized to Javier for using her pain to validate my identity. I used to resent the fact that she didn't teach me Spanish, that she didn't maintain our family traditions. I've come to understand that her decision to ditch those things was more authentically Mexican than performing any of the rituals I thought of as real. Listening to reggaeton, making tacos, caring about a flag. Lo siento. I didn't realize how intrinsically American it was of me to think I could have an identity by having things. Spanish, tattoos, silver chains, scars. If I could do it again, panicked, I would tell myself that identity is defined as much by what you have as it is by what you've lost. Wanting to recover those things was like feeling homesick for a home I never had. That, to me, is Chicano. Lo siento. I've come to understand, panicked, that race is a lie, but it's a lie like money is a lie, which means it's real because it's a system. You can't really opt out of it. You have to play along with it to some degree. Which, I've realized, was the source of my youthful anger. I went from being American, unencumbered by identity, to realizing that I had in fact been burdened, tasked with something, and I blamed everyone around me for it. I blamed my authentically Mexican family for putting me in that situation by not preparing me, by not telling me what I was and allowing the world to surprise me with it instead. I blame myself, too, because who was I, surrounded by all the comforts they had sacrificed to give me, to tell them they were wrong? Lo siento. The answer is, I'm no one at all, except for my experiences. I'm the things I've seen and the things I've felt. I'm the people I've met. Those things are authentic. You can't lie your way in or out of them like you can lie your way into a college. Like you can lie to your friends about whether or not the Mexican restaurant you're eating at is real, just to feel a temporary surge in authority, in authenticity. All that is to say, panicked, it's not about whether you can make tacos or not. It helps, but it's not about that. Race is a system more concerned with creating experiential differences than it is about whether or not you're really anything. Abuela and Javier taught me that. It's more important that you care about the lives and the pain of the people around you than it is for you to know how to say dick in Spanish. It's more important that you listen rather than speak. Lo siento, I said again, in the shadow of the Rosas building, as if the 100th time would undo what I had done to Javier. Javier sucked his teeth, he pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a long drag. He exhaled and turned his other arm, the one that hadn't just been burned, to show me. Look, he said, and I saw several scars and grease burns. Must have happened to him plenty of times before. My arms, meanwhile, had never felt so clean and unused. I'm sorry, I said in English. You know what you are? He said, locking eyes with me, his face deathly serious, my heart leaping. What? I asked. A prick, he said. I let out a cackle, relief and joy and sadness. I thought it sounded an awful lot like my abuela's. I also should have explained that I did teach the staff at Rosas how to say dick in like 20 different ways in English. And the one that they liked the most was prick for whatever reason, because they like to roll the R. So we would just play hot potato with the word prick all day, like prick, and I would have to say it to someone else. There are so many words for dick in English. It is bonkers. Words that I was like, I forgot that one, but we do have it. There's this like distinctly UK one, like trouser snake. And I taught them that, and they were just like, yeah, more. Really golden years of my life going on in that tortilla factory. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to read out loud to you. It has been so wonderful to do now a second in-person event. I was doing a virtual book tour when my book first came out, which I found deeply condescending. It was like I would hop onto my computer and the person on the other side would be like, welcome to Los Angeles. It's like, I'm in my living room. I was telling you earlier, it was like a monkey's paw situation where I was like, I want to go everywhere for my book tour. And it was like, you will. You will go absolutely everywhere within the span of 3 days.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. And it's such an honor for me, honestly. Even just in that passage, I can tell you that it completely, not hyperbolically, I've never read a book that I could see myself in as much as this one. So just on a personal level, it feels very exciting. And obviously, from my chair at Grindr, I was reading the column for so many years. And I'm curious how it was moving from the column and then adapting it to the book.
It was real rough because I was working like 3 jobs at the same time. One of them was at NBC News, where I was mostly reporting on Chechnya stuff. So it was a lot of me at 2 a.m. on the phone with some Russian person while they were just like giving me daily atrocities. They were just like, yes, there's more death today, unfortunately. I was just like, oh, okay, writing that down, got it. So I would be doing that. And then my other side job was like, I was doing these puff pieces for Teen Vogue. So the one I remember most distinctly was me on the M train with the Notes app open being like, Kylie Jenner just matched her fidget spinner with her dress. Meanwhile, like it's like blood running down my eye. Just like I'm in horrible pain. Also running the Ola Papi advice column, which is right when it started to take off is when agents started approaching me being like, hey, you should think about doing a book about this, which I immediately did start thinking about doing a book about it. But what I didn't want to do was just take all the columns I'd already written, bind them together and put it out there. because there were like at this point like 4 different outlets that have hosted Ola Poppy, so I didn't want to like knock on all their doors, be like, hey, it's me, can you give me your stuff that I wrote for you? It just seemed like a headache, so I knew I had to write something completely different, and I knew I only had coffee breaks to do it. So this book is very much the product of a lot of stress, a lot of caffeine, a lot of sleepless nights. It's a miracle that I finished.
You know, one of the lines in the book that stuck with me the most was about memory being an act of creation. And I sort of wondered if, you know, some of the stories that came up in the column and then that you rewrote into the book, did you remember any of them differently, or did your the way you experienced those memories change at all in that time?
Yeah, so one thing I knew I wanted to do with this book is, so the way Ola Poppy worked was it sort of undid a lot of advice column conventions, because when I originally did it, it was supposed to be a satire. It was never supposed to be serious, and it's gotten so out of hand that you're all here today. But it was supposed to be a one-note joke, kind of, that what if Dear Abby was a gay Mexican man on Grindr? And what if he just didn't care about your problems and only talked about himself? And so it was supposed to be me. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Space Ghost Coast to Coast before. I modeled a lot of my life after that show. I remember watching it as a kid, and I was just so tickled when they would have like this very famous band on, and Space Ghost was way more interested in fighting with his co-hosts and just like talking about his life. And they would try to interject and say something about like their project or whatever, and he'd be like, shut up, I have business to take care of with this person over here. I thought that was so funny. And so I wanted Ola Poppy to just be that, like me. It sounds so mean in retrospect, which is why it didn't work. It's just me roasting the shit out of someone for being gay and sad. Like it just like, it was never going to. I'm not that mean at the end of the day, you know. And that was my business savvy coming through. But when it came for me to be cruel, I couldn't do it. Those are my children, so I couldn't do that. And I kind of was pressed to start taking them seriously, which put me in the awkward position of like, well, now I have to actually answer your questions. And I don't have any expertise to do that. Like at that time, I was like taking assignments from some mysterious twink in Prague who wanted me to recap gay porn, and I had to get 2 articles to him by noon tomorrow. I was going to get it. So it was just like, that's where I was at that point in my life, trying not to go back to my family's farm. So I had no business telling anyone else how to live. So I kind of had to fake it till you make it. All that's to say, that's what I loved about Ola Poppy, is that it sort of messed around with like, I'm an advice columnist, but not really. And I kind of wanted the memoir to do the same thing. I wanted it to be like, this is a memoir, but I'm kind of like calling myself a liar throughout the whole thing, or talking about a lot of the mistakes I made. So each story, I'm very open about it being like, this is how I remember it, and this is how it impacted me. And my understanding of it is pretty dumb, actually. And here's why. So like in the chapter about being bullied, for example, I sort of talk about how that stuff happened. And then I tried to go back as a grown-ass man and return to that same middle school and just be like, ha, middle school, I beat you now, I'm better than you. And then meanwhile, like everything's like up to here to me. It's like built for children, and I'm just like walking through it like I'm gonna beat it up or something. It was silly. It was very silly. And so I'm trying to say that like my understanding of those traumatic events very much guided a lot of how I saw myself and how I sort of manifested certain habits, engaged in certain behaviors, and how I can't really change what happened to me, but I can change how I understand what happened to me, the story I build around those events. And so that was the part for me that was sort of like the column, that it plays around with this idea of like, yeah, this happened, but it's a story of what happened, and I was telling it wrong, and here's how I told it in a way that served me better. So it's lots of fourth wall type stuff that I love.
Well, and even with the middle school stuff, like you revisit it more than once in the book, and the way that you talk about it changes, right? Like there's the earlier story that's specifically about the trauma of middle school, and then when you encounter your bully on Grindr, you kind of revisit that story, and it's a little different, right? Was that intentional?
It brings me no pleasure to remind you that it was your competitor Scruff that the bully reached out to me. He woofed me. I'm so sorry.
You know, no.
Yeah, it was one of those things, and that one was very true to life. And I tell that story sometimes. Like after Ola Poppy came out, I've done some radio interviews and stuff like that. And the hosts always seem very surprised that I handled it the way I did. They were like, I would have cussed him out. And I was just like,
oh, I would have handled it differently too, but I would have hooked up with him.
Oh no.
That was my surprise about the story.
You can maybe look at his picture first and
wow.
decide.
Maybe.
But that never crossed my mind because I was like, gross. But it was interesting, like suddenly not being forced, but like being put behind this person's eyes, like recontextualizing what happened to me, what I was certain happened to me. And I was so certain that this person was just pure evil, like this person who was very motivated by wanting to hurt me and not much beyond that. And having to reckon with the reality that there was a lot of other stuff going on there was not pleasant, because when we have a perfect narrative, it feels good. There is a certain pleasure in simple things. And even if the things were bad and the story that we're telling is horrible, oh, this evil person did something evil to me, that's not great. No one wants that to happen. But the one-dimensional nature of it gives us some sense of completion. Like, we know this thing exists perfectly. We can wrap our brains around it. It's very easy to understand, actually. And then when you start introducing these peaks and valleys that, other people always do, every human is so complex, even the ones that you hate, it sort of makes you reconsider and think, well, if it isn't that perfect story, that perfect narrative where I'm just the victim and he's just the abuser, I don't want to have to revisit that time and reconsider everything that happened to me and recontextualize everything that happened to me. And I think most of the book is about recontextualization. I think each story is just about turning your head sideways and looking at an event in a different way to see what you can glean out of it, and trying your best not to be afraid to do that. Because at the end of the day, as human beings, we're narrative-driven creatures. Well, all we have are our stories, and they become very precious to us. And having to revisit them, in some cases rewrite them, is painful.
I think that's why it's an advice column, right? That's good advice.
Oh, well, thank you. I had quite a few years to get good at it. The very early columns, not my best work, very funny, a little mean, but like they sort of became more empathetic. I became much softer. I got a little bit more money. I started, eating the fancy ice cream, and I became nicer.
You do reference fancy snacks several times.
I do daily. It's my biggest thing. Like when I go to the grocery store, this is so dumb. I feel like everyone has their little sign of like, I've made it. And for me, it was just like, those fancy peanut butter cups that aren't Reese's? They're like the unreal crispy quinoa peanut butter cups or whatever. Sometimes I buy those and I'm just like, I have conquered this planet. It's all, the oyster is wide open. I can do whatever I want. No one can stop me. I am made of light. I am the next Virgin Mary. It's all just like there. For me, grocery shopping brings a lot of that to the surface. Always comes back to food with me.
Yeah. The other thing that I felt like you did such an amazing job of bringing your full complexity to was talking about your sexuality. I mean, so much of the book is about your sexuality, but not just with guys, right? Like the story of Rebecca and your sort of childhood romance with her, I thought was so interesting in, I don't know, I think part of what interested me was that the generation below us of queer people is even so much more fluid, or at least bringing it so centrally. And I was curious if remembering those stories and integrating her into your bigger story helps you relate to that.
Yeah, that story was one that I was actually, I'm rarely nervous to write a story. Usually I just go for it. Like oftentimes people ask me like, was it painful? Did it hurt to revisit that point in your life? And I feel like there's something wrong with me because I'm just looking at it like, like in RuPaul's Drag Race when they're like, and we provided this lovely wall of material for you to make whatever you want out of. That's how I see my trauma. So I'm just like
the fabric planet wall.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't feel that bad about it. It doesn't like trigger any like brain receptors to be like, this is horrible, this is scary, oh my god, we can't do this. I'm like, I'm gonna make the best dress you've ever seen out of what happened to me in middle school. Like I just see it that way, for better or for worse. Thank you. They're nice. But with that chapter, it was more like I wasn't afraid to write it. I was afraid of how it was going to be received, because I was growing up in the time, in rural Oklahoma, where a lot of the rhetoric was like, you just haven't met the right girl yet. You just haven't met the right woman yet. Or, like you're not gay. You just need to date a girl that you really like. And it happened to be the case that in this chapter, it's about me dating a girl that I really liked. And yes, me liking her was kind of complicated. It didn't feel the same. It felt like something was missing the whole time. But at the same time, there was so much warmth. There was so much depth to that relationship. I felt so understood and seen. Like if I ever find a man who checks up on me the way she did, I'm going to just marry him probably. like we would just get on the phone together and I would be playing, I don't know, I was such a dude back then. I was probably playing Halo 2 or whatever. In the 8th grade, 9th grade. And I would just have my phone like clamped to my ear because at this point in time, I had the Motorola Razr, which was the biggest flex of all. It was huge.
What
for
color?
me. It was just the slate one. It wasn't anything fancy.
It wasn't the pink
but
one.
yeah, I was flexing on those farmers. I had a Motorola Razr, my first phone. And I would just have it pressed to my cheek and we would just talk about nothing for a really long time. And that's kind of what love feels like to me. All the other stuff is nice. Yeah, it's helpful if I'm like viscerally, physically attracted to someone, which I found unfortunately is kind of crucial. But my gosh, the emotions that went through my little teenage brain back then were so good. It turned the world into gold for me. And I wanted to be able to describe that, the way I felt and the way I saw things, without introducing any of these like how I'm supposed to feel type narratives. So like I think there's this common thing where after gay men come out of the closet, the life before then was all supposed to just be kind of fake, or you're supposed to discard it, or you're supposed to be embarrassed by it. And I bought into that. You know, there was a lot of downright mean things that people said about the girls that they would date while in the closet. You know, like there's this concept of like the gold star gay, like I've never done anything with a woman, that's icky. A lot of talk about how gross vaginas are and stuff like that. And I wanted to write something that validated the way I felt and the depths of those relationships, while at the same time sort of challenging people to incorporate the time before they came out of the closet, for like, you know, in the case of cis gay men, to really bring that into their life, into the present, because that's still part of who you were. That was part of your journey. That is part of your everything. You can't just get rid of it, and you can't just pretend that it was all just a weird little joke, you know? And also what I discovered in writing about that part of my life was like, yeah, I was closeted homosexual or whatever, but I think for a lot of kids at that time while they're dating, they're just making mistakes. They're just making all kinds of mistakes. Everything's going wrong. Weird things are happening to your body. You say the wrong thing. She gets mad at you. She texts her friends. They hate you now. It's just like there's lots of little weird things that go wrong in those adolescent, teen, juvenile relationships, or whatever you want to call it, that are fruitful, that kind of make you who you are later in life. And I don't think it was any different for me, just because I hadn't really come into my own sexuality yet. So it was basically a chapter of me validating my younger self and being like, you're part of my story. You belong right here, buddy. You know, it's you and me. I learned a lot.
Love that. And how has the response been to that in particular? I mean, your fears were not borne out.
None of my fears are really ever borne out. I'm never afraid of the right thing. I'm like, but it's part of my weird superstitions now, where like, well, if I get real anxious about it, it won't happen. So now I just have to be constantly afraid.
I get that.
So, you know, regarding the horrible state of the world, I'm sorry, I failed. Those were things that I should have been worried about,
Right.
and they happened because
you
they
should
caught
get
me
really
slipping.
worried about global warming. I think.
That was me.
Yeah.
If I had simply cried about it years and years ago, we would not be in this situation right now.
It's your fault.
Mis apologias.
So, and do you think of the book as gay literature, queer literature?
Has
You know
my
what-
book come out to me?
in a Walmart parking lot?
In the Walmart parking lot. I have thought of every way under the sun on how to describe this book and how to categorize this book, and none of them ever really stick. I'm such an annoying person in that, like, once I think I've figured out how I want to think or talk about something, some other like door in my brain opens up and it's like, what about this? So every time I try to call it like a gay book, I just feel like I'm diminishing it somehow, or I feel like I'm flattening it out in a way that it doesn't need to be. And then on the other hand, I'm just like, remember that whole like ad campaign that your publisher came up with, where they were like, this is the gay book. So it's like, you look at all the evidence, you know, Mr. Policeman, I gave you all the clues. It is pretty much a gay book, in that I am a gay person and I wrote a book. But I also feel like I never want to be pigeonholed in that way, and I never want people to look at it and be like, this isn't for me, or like, oh, those little gays with their little literature off over there writing their gay little words
On gay sex apps.
yeah, on
Like,
Grindr. Yeah, incorporating Grindr was certainly a decision. And I couldn't not do it, because that Grindr has unfortunately dictated at least a fourth of my life at this point.
Listen, me too.
Well, hey. So I knew I would have to talk about Grindr quite a bit, and I do have this urge to be a communicator to a lot of different people. So I didn't want to have that. Like, have any of y'all, this is going to get me in trouble. Have y'all ever read like American Dirt or anything like that? I'm sorry for bringing that book up again.
I don't know what that is.
I think that book ushered in the pandemic. Like, I just remember like, I remember like being in a bookstore and be like, oh, there's the big controversial book. And all of a sudden, boom, like Shelter in Place. But I knew I wanted to avoid putting myself in italics where it was just like, you say the thing that Mexicans know this is a thing, but you got to put it in italics so it doesn't scare the people who aren't Mexican. And then in like non-italics, you say what it really is. You know what I mean? It's like a quinceañera. It's like slanted. And then it's like a 15th birthday party for a girl. It's just like, I didn't want to do that with Grindr, with the Tortilla Factory, with anything, because I wanted to. It's such a weird dance because you want to say everything on your terms and you decide on that. And then you realize, yeah, but I want a lot of people to read this book as well. So I would say it is a book that is the product of my many neuroses and the many conversations I have with myself over what a book should be, how literature should work, what my words should look like. It's just all of that. And I can no longer recognize it because I stared at it for so long.
Yeah, I bet that's true. I feel like to me, when I read it, it's so recognizably gay, not just in the content of the stories, though, but also like the verbiage. Like, I feel like your voice is so kind of droll to me in a way that I feel very connected to, whether that's gayness or sort of isolated, weird kid in middle America-ness or whatever. But it does feel very gay to me, just even in the word choice.
I for one reason or another, tend to think of it as Oklahomanness, just because, for better or for worse, I used to hate country music as a kid, but I think it impacted a lot how I tell stories, because a lot of the way I tell stories is I don't usually go for the wild linguistic loop-de-loops of prose that, you know, some other fabulous writers do. I feel like I'm very... for better or for worse, plain spoken. I sort of give the story in its bare elements, which I enjoy. And that's kind of how country music works as well. That's how people gossip in rural America. You know, you get real excited for it and you do the little voices of the person you hate. And then she said this, like that, you know. I learned how to tell stories that way, and especially because my mom was a high school English teacher. She had all the chisme from everyone at that school, and so we would just spend hours talking shit. Like, when I would visit her in like the after hours that our school had, and we would just talk crap about our teachers, about sometimes other students when we were at home. She also had this like gaggle of Oklahoma gays that loved her because my mom is kind of iconic like that. I don't know,
and English teachers are kind of iconic like that.
The bond between gay kids and English teachers it's never been stronger. It is the backbone of this community, I think. And my English teachers really have always been the ones to make me feel like I could keep going. Like, I remember I was in middle school, which, as you know, was a terrible experience, but I had this one English teacher named Miss Bauman, who was very old, even in my time, and she was like from the poodle skirt era, you know, and she had the big hair, and she would have these words out for us to make sentences from, and I would make my sentences, and she would be like, John Paul, you are so good at writing little sentences, and I want to just be like, Miss Bauman, I'm gay. Like, they just have that effect where it's just like, I feel so at peace around you. I'm ready to reveal everything. English teachers, they're very important to me.
Yeah. My 6th grade English teacher told me I was the only kid who understood her humor, and I knew that was somehow because I was a homosexual.
I was about to say. Yeah. Okay, faggot.
Very bad.
Yeah, it was very, and like also librarians, I would add, like, I had this, yes, I had this librarian in Cache Middle School, mind you, Cache Middle School, Cache America, it's very small, and we had a little library with like Hank the Cow Dog and this author named Peg Carrot, who I think everyone should read her. She's not as famous as I thought she was. To me, she was God, and then I got older and people were like, who? I'm like, how dare you besmirch the good name of Peg Carrot? But the librarian there was named Miss Bullock, and she had this huge, massive, like 80s hair, clumpy makeup up here, deeply divorced, like smoker's voice, and we would just like chill during lunch because I couldn't go out there, I'd be eaten alive. So I would just sit around with Miss Bullock, and we would just talk about our lives, and she would talk about how much she hated her ex-husband, and I would talk about how much I hated my classmates, and it was just GSA. It was Gay Straight Alliance. It was just like it was just like the Rainbow Club in the two of us, no one else, just me and heterosexual Miss Bullock.
I
sharing a
love that.
bond.
That's iconic. So you used to live in DC. You make mention
Sure
of it in the
did.
book.
Yes.
And what were you doing then?
Good question. What was I doing here?
Writing.
Let me remember, if you want to call it that. I was doing a lot of content mill type stuff. So I was just so desperate to get out of rural Oklahoma because at this point I had graduated from college, had to go back with my parents, who again I call it the farm because it is. And I was just so desperate to get out of there. I was writing like Huffington Post community articles for free, and it was all like deeply embarrassing stuff. It was just like, I don't know, 6 gay things I wish I'd known before I knew I was gay. This is a gay article. Oh my God, please give me your clicks, like that sort of stuff. And this random man, this is going to sound very shady. I don't know how to explain it any better than this, but a stranger who had just made a blogging startup in DC slid into my DMs after I had published maybe 2 Huffington Post articles for free and was just like, hey, I'm doing this startup over here and I'm looking to hire someone who can do Latino immigration issues and gay issues, and you can do both. This is his first DM to me, by the way. And I was like, that's right.
Which is the right answer.
I absolutely can. Can you move me up there?
Can you pay me?
Well, there was also this really uncomfortable, like, I think he was like vaguely flirting, but not really. But I was very all about business at that point where I was just like, move me to DC, let me work for you. And then I can just, occasionally bat you away or whatever I need to do. Very dark stuff. So he did move me up to DC. I was here working for this terrible blogging website. It was very like, with one tweet, Queen with a K, Nancy Pelosi just slayed John Boehner, house down boots, like that sort of thing. Like, it was very that by John Paul Bramer. Bespoke content. And it was me and my friend Daphne, whose job was to then make the memes to accompany that. So it was very like lots of like photos taken from down here of Nancy Pelosi and she's pointing or whatever. And it's just like, there goes our legend, our queen, our icon, whatever. So it was me and her, and we were at this place, and I didn't know this at the time, but it was being run by this Australian man who made a whole lot of money off of phone apps. And then he started siphoning a lot of that money into US politics, which is illegal. So he had to flee to Australia, took his best buddy with him. Then everyone started getting fired until I was the most senior member at the age of 23. And then when this weird other startup came in and wanted to acquire us because of all the Facebook followers we had bought, he was just like, I need to speak with the most senior member here. And I'm like, you're looking at him. I'm like 23, hyper caffeinated and just like sleep deprived in my little corner with my laptop. You're like, where is everybody? And I'm like, I'm everybody.
Well, and I am curious what you think about like the state of digital media now. I mean, you've been in it for quite a while, from those days to the present. And obviously there's been a rocky road in some ways, but where do you think we're at? And do you still write for some of these types of places?
No, never that. I've thankfully left that behind. Although there is this one thing that I need to burn at some point where like bless my parents, they've always been very supportive of me. They created this little like those things that science fair projects are put on, like
a trifold board,
like those sorts of things. They printed a bunch of my like article headlines on it. The most cursed artifact in the world. If anyone finds it, I'm over. I'm done. It's in my room. You will never find out where in rural Oklahoma it is. But if you do find it, I'm done. It's a challenge to all of you. Because there are headlines on it that are just very like of the era, 2014. As far as like the state of digital media, I mean, I do my best to not think about it. Yeah. It makes me sad. It's just very like there's no money, but all the money is being siphoned off into the worst people you could even imagine. Like picture the worst person. He's worse than that. And he has like a 6-figure or more job at CNN to make these like wet fart tweets every once in a while that are just like, here's why the wokes are what they're up to today. They're trying to make Superman bisexual, like, stuff like that. And it's just like, here's $1 million. Thank you for your service. Meanwhile, everyone else is just like passing the same $20 bill through Venmo to each other after they get laid off, making those tweets like, hire Carrie, she's great. Like, it's just, It's a nightmare. It is a nightmare. It is like being in one of Jigsaw's little puzzles. It's just like, my God, there's no money. Everything feels very oppressive. Everything you do is wrong. Not only do you not make a lot of money, but on the plus side, everyone hates you. So it's just like, what are the upsides to being in? Every time I see like, oh, we've just launched a new digital media outlet, I'm like, to what end?
Yeah.
For who? Why? What are you gonna do?
I think you even have a line that's like something about people trying to start a blog to like uplift the community as if that were the best
I have
way.
never felt uplifted by a blog.
Yeah.
Know that. Never in my life.
I maybe have, but not often.
I'm trying to think about the last time I felt uplifted at all. Actually, that might not be like a blog. That might not be a blog thing. That might just be a me thing. I'm just like I at my last in-person event, the first one I had, it was in Tulsa, which, love Oklahoma, hometown, go us, whatever. And this very kind person sitting across from me was like, who are some of the people that you look up to? And who are some of the people that you feel inspired by? My brain started just doing like, like they used to sell these in Cracker Barrel, that like ball where there's this like fake weasel attached to it and you can turn the ball on and it starts bouncing all over the place and it looks like the weasel's chasing it, but it's actually
That's
just a
who you're
ball.
inspired
My
by?
brain is just like moving around like that, like come up with an answer, say something. Because I never feel like I look up to many people. And I'm like Reba McEntire because she's a survivor. It was horrible. I couldn't think of anyone.
And then who did you say?
I said Reba McEntire.
Oh yeah, for real.
I meant
Okay.
what I said.
Yeah.
To my credit, it was just like I'm just spinning the bingo cage in my head. Like anyone, come on, say your mom, like something.
Right.
I just don't do that. I see other people as people. Really, I think that whenever we make a hoopla about someone, it's usually just like you don't know that person. Could be terrible. Who knows?
I feel that way on reality television when people are so eager to make their hometown proud. And I'm like, I don't
never
feel
felt that
way. No, I don't
never
feel
experienced it. Don't understand that emotion.
Don't
I'm
feel
just
attached
like-
to my town, really.
Well, also people in my town, they don't know what I do.
Sure.
The only time they reach out to me is when BuzzFeed does these like 10 funny tweets from gay Twitter when they went off on some event or whatever. And they're like, bro, you're in BuzzFeed. I'm just like, thanks, Tyler.
Well, I also listened to Authentically Mexican, which I also loved. And I feel like that work, I mean, tell me if this is how you think of it, but that work felt like it was so much about your search for your sort of ethnic identity. And then Hola Papi is in large part, although not entirely, about your search for sexual identity. And I guess I was curious about those two in dialogue and like whether or not you're searching for one impacted you're searching for the other.
Authentically Mexican was very inspired by Amazon Audible Original Money. I was just like
Powerful inspiration.
uplifted by the Audible Original. No, so they reached out and they're like, we would love to do something with you. And I was like, oh, you've been on my mind. I would love to do something with you as well. And then my agent is like, okay, remember they're Amazon, they're evil, like don't give them anything too good. And then I gave them that, which I was pretty proud of. I thought it was really nice.
I love that.
Then people started reviewing it and I was like, the gall, I didn't take this seriously. Don't you like I got very upset. I was in my little head. I was just like, this isn't fair. I didn't put my whole boot into that. Give me another go. But it ended up okay. I listened to it again recently and I was like, hey, not bad. What did they say? Whoa. I just mix my metaphors. They say some pig to babe, don't they?
They do. What did you say?
I was about to say add a pig. What is that from?
Maybe nothing.
Charlotte's Web. I was just like, yeah, I was proud of myself. I was like, you did that well enough.
But do you think that you are searched for your sort of journey of understanding yourself as Mexican? In some ways, it started earlier, right?
Yes. I would say I couldn't have picked a better little group to be born into because I think it's such a wealth of things to excavate, things to look into. It's also very exhausting because sometimes I will come across this like dusty old blog and I'll read through it and I'll be like, oh, this is cool. This is some historical information about like this event that happened during the colonization of Mexico or whatever. And I'll read some sentence and then suddenly I have to reorganize how I identify myself. It's horrible. Like I really don't like that. It's very tiring, but at the same time, really cool because you find these nuggets of information that have been tucked away in random places, and you get to bring them to light and talk about them and figure out how they relate to you or how they don't relate to you. And as a person who's very interested in doing that sort of thing, I feel like I was given a really good board game at birth. Like I get to play this little game where I get to talk about food and culture and aesthetics and all the things that I love to talk about. Thank you to Mexico.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like it is it's a board game that might be like Jumanji, where I also get trapped into shame bubbles for years at a time. But
that's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of the fun.
Part of it.
I do want to ask you one more thing, and then I think we're going to go to some audience questions.
Okay.
But just in terms of sort of Latino identity, we're in this interesting moment of like there are lots of words like Latinx and Latine and Latino, and I feel like the one that you use the most is just Mexican. And I wondered about your relationship to any of the others, and if you
the letter E really came through at the last moment where it was just like I'm here too,
out of nowhere.
Yeah, I'm more of an avant-garde act than you thought I was, because like X was such a serve.
I like the at sign actually, which
I
is
think
kind
that
of retro.
one's so
now.
funny.
I love it.
Latinat. I like to say Latinx to people, especially around my like non-Latino friends. They get so uncomfortable, and sometimes I'm like I like to just deadpan like that's how you say it, because I'm bored. There's a lot of
identify
words
with Latinx
with
or
Latinx.
Latinx?
I'm in this place right now where I've learned to stop trusting language to serve me, where I'm just like, you're always going to change, aren't you? I think in a few years there's going to be something else. There's going to be new words. The words that my abuela used, like, and she was using words that like, she's like this little brown woman who, for, in Twitter's terms, was being deeply problematic about herself, just like saying things and using terms that like we consider outdated or we consider like inaccurate. And it's also weird because a lot of this falls back on like, well, what's the consensus, right? We have to ask the people who it applies to, but the people who it applies to by and large are probably using words that all of us here might be like, that's weird. And that's not to say one is better than the other. It just means that this is a complicated thing, and we're sort of asking language to do something that language is always going to fail at doing, which is you can never quite capture all the experiences, all the nuances. There's always going to be people who are included, people who are excluded, and you do your best to be a good person. You do your best to show up to those linguistic debates in good faith, and you try to hammer out the details because, as opposed to a lot of other fields, language does care about your feelings. Language kind of relies on you being party to it and you accepting, yes, that is the meaning of this word. I am using it in this way, in a way that you too can recognize. But even in that process, you are not truly privy to the dimensions, the depths, the nuances that person's bringing to their understanding of it. This is why we need to be telepathic squids or something, because with language, it's so faulty, it's so tricky. I spend a lot of time laboring over it because I just know that I'm going to say something at some point and someone's just going to like take that one bit and it's just like, oh, you said a horrible thing, or you excluded me, you erased me, etc. Which are things that are good to be mindful of, but at the same time also good to be mindful of the fact that language is here to fail you. It is not your friend until it comes time to write an Audible original, in which case it is your best friend.
And in fact, your job.
And my job, in fact, yes. My job is to let people down.
Well, I think we have a few minutes for a couple of questions from the audience if anyone has one. I don't know if we have I guess I'm just going to run this mic. Okay.
Cool.
Have you considered becoming a playwright or going into other genres?
Yes, I am working on I don't know if it's going to be a screenplay or a play script at the moment, but I'm working on something about the famous rat trial that happened in France, where the Catholic Church tried to put actual rats on trial. And then this very like spirited lawyer was like, I will defend the rats. That's incredible. And I want to celebrate that.
I can't wait for that.
It's called Rat Trial.
This mic should not have come to me. Hello, I'm the ignorant little man who did ask for a portrait
Yes.
of you.
I'm
Yeah?
so down.
Sick.
Yeah.
Alright.
Okay.
But the question, first, thank you for doing this. This is fantastic and very exciting, actually. But the question is, if you had to replace any part of your body, right, with a food or drink, so like you could have like hot Cheeto toenails or something like that. Like, what would it be? Which part? Which food?
I mean, I'm gonna have to go with my original thought, which is that both my feet just become these huge conchas, like just very spongy steps everywhere I go. Very colorful pink concha, of course. Fun fact: I also, when pitching what my book should look like, I was like, I want it to be the cutest little pastry in the panaderia. I want it to look like a little treat. So I think a lot about conchas and pan dulce in general. So I'm gonna have to go with that. I think it would look really funny.
And if that's your question and you haven't listened to Authentically Mexican, there's a whole section on conchas.
Yes, Stan, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi there. I wanted to know that since you have two families from two wildly different backgrounds, what are maybe the various members of your family's relationships in, knowing of, acknowledging of the other, because this is America.
Yeah.
And I too have family from south of the United States-Mexican border, and also family that is like from Lynchburg, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
It goes how you think it goes.
Mm-hmm.
How have you navigated that? Has any of that impacted maybe your identity of yourself, or maybe or maybe how you frame yourself within this Venn diagram, right?
Yeah.
Where you're just like right in the middle.
I'm mostly trying to determine if I want to share gossip or not. There's Chisme. My book got reviewed in the New York Times, and then I heard from a family member who I had not heard from since I was a literal baby, someone on my dad's side. And what's interesting about my dad's side is that they very much pieced out right at the beginning, so I didn't really know them that well. The only person from my dad's side who we were in regular contact with was my dad, and his job was to sort of be in the room and let all of us roast him for being like white, which was really fun. But I heard from Jane after the review came out, and it was her asking me to do a sort of book club event with her and her friends celebrating Latinx voices. And I was just like, what did you just call me, Aunt Jane? It was just very strange to see this person who never bothered to talk to me before suddenly striving to use the correct terminology to acknowledge my ethnicity. It was just like, this is very odd. So in terms of like navigating my two families, I've only ever really had to navigate the Mexican one, and they've been their own trip, to be sure, but I'm so glad that I've only really had to deal with them, because it's enough. It is certainly enough. My abuela was one of 11 children. My abuelo also had a really large family. There is another Juan Pablo in our family. He goes much harder than I do. He has like a rosary tattooed down his arm, and he wears like the long white shirt, and I like to just stare at him at funerals and be like, it's us. It's weird. It's really weird. And it's not just weird in terms of my two families, in terms of my mom and my dad. It's also, like I mentioned earlier, there's so many differences among the Mexican side of my family and myself. Like, I think that my little branch of the family, like my parents, my mom, she's very like funny and cynical and witty, and she doesn't take holidays or religion very seriously. Whereas there's other members of my family that have literally chased the Pope Mobile for miles, just chasing more blessings from him with his little like spoon thing. I forget what it's called. They take it quite seriously. So within cultures, obviously, there's a whole lot of differences that can happen. For me, it's just like, a lot of the pain that I experienced when I was younger was kind of not having a community. And so I've sort of expanded my view on that to be like, it goes beyond my family. Being in community with my friends of friends, the people who I work with on a daily basis who are part of various struggles, that to me is where I find peace with myself. If I go looking for it from Aunt Jane, I don't think I'm going to hear much more than like, we just loved that Latinx little book you wrote. I'm curious to hear. Well, this is the funny part. Like what her idea of me was, because I did do the book talk because I'm silly. I just wanted to see like what was going on. And when she was introducing me, she was like, "And we just remember you were always drawing and you were always writing and you were so creative." I'm like, "Lady, when I was like a fetus, like I did not like." Yeah, my dad's side is pretty unhinged in that way, but yeah, it's something that I think about, and I famously kind of don't write about my dad much because I think the Mexicans in my family are so silly and funny. But it's coming; his time will come. No one will be spared. Thank you.
I think we have time for about one more if somebody has a burning question. Yeah.
Hello, thank you. I was curious on a different note, what you opinions on Halloween? I know it's like a canonically queer holiday. I don't know if you have like a different relationship with Dia de los Muertos or costume ideas or anything.
Yeah, so I'm usually in Mexico for it, and they do have a Halloween there, which I think is nice. I think that everyone should just collect all the holidays and celebrate them all. So, like in Mexico, after Halloween, you have the first day of Dia de Muertos, which is November 1st for children. November 2nd is for the adults, and you get to be wild. But I'm usually not here for it, which is kind of sad because I enjoy gay Halloween. I enjoy seeing all the little pictures of it. And I always have it in my head that I'm going to do something really fun, that I'm going to put a costume together, and that I need to start putting it together in September. And then I just sort of never do. I this year I wanted to be my original Condé Nast Olapapi illustration, where he was just wearing like cowboy boots, a jockstrap, and a sombrero, and he had like a typewriter, and that's it. But I couldn't find a typewriter, so I gave up very quickly. And I was like, well, now this just feels vain. The typewriter is what made it camp. Now I'm just, some hot person. Nasty. No. So I don't know. Also, my mom's birthday is Halloween. Very spooky. So we do some birthday stuff. My aunt was born on Christmas. My theory is that my abuela was just handing them holidays so she could remember, but that's not been proven nor disproven. If I get to the root of that, it will be in book 2.
Well, thank you so much for coming to see us in your old home of DC. It was a pleasure to read the book, and I think we're going to have books on sale over here right afterwards. Do you want to close this out, David?
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, JP, once again.
Thank you for having me.
I'll make sure I'm coming. So we know there's a global supply chain thing that's happening, so we don't have a whole lot of books tonight, but check in with Glenn over here from Solid State. Glenn, we're really glad you're here. Are you up for signing some books for those who want it? Great. We
The
appreciate
supply
that.
chain thing is happening to me specifically. No one else was targeted.
Yes, exactly. Just like AD, which you mentioned earlier.
Yes,
when that book came out,
exactly.
it brought about the pandemic.
Exactly.
Thanks everybody for coming. Please come back. We close at 8, so you have a little time to walk around the building. There you go.
Ooh. What if they locked us in and we just had a little sleepover moment?
Oh,
Also, if you are the person who wanted a paperback Olapapi, I have it for you. It's somewhere. Just yes. Okay, I'll remember. The ARC. Yes, good. I hope they don't close the doors on us, or maybe I hope they do. That would be fun.
yeah.
That would be really cool.
Yes, you love librarians like lots of us queers. That's how I got in the profession. Anyway, thanks for coming. Please come back. We put up a flyer for a couple of events that are happening next week, so we hope you'll come back soon. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks, JP.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Where am I signing? Oh, I don't know.